Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Bienvenue à l'Université d'Ottawa et au Centre d'études en politique internationale. My name is Alexandra Gheciu. I am the director of CIPS, and it is my truly great pleasure to welcome all of you to this important and, might I add, very timely event on Canadian security interests and Trump 2.0. What a privilege to have so many distinguished colleagues, old friends, and new partners gathered here to collectively reflect on our lives in a very turbulent world and also on what Canada could and should do to navigate it. The questions before us today are certainly not easy ones. Frankly, I suspect we wouldn't be here if they were. But they are absolutely vital. And the discussions that we're going to have today promise to be as stimulating as they are necessary. It becomes even more relevant to think about all these matters if we remember that today we meet at a time when we should be celebrating. After all, it is the UN's 80th birthday. But it is hard to have a birthday party when we live in a time of deep uncertainty, profound insecurity, and grave questions about the future of the UN and arguably about the future of multilateral governance more broadly. It is a particular pleasure to co-sponsor this event with our old friends from the Canadian Pugwash group. We've been doing this for a number of years, and it is always amazing to bring them back. And I have to say, each time we meet, the world seems to have become a little more dangerous. On the bright side, I think that means that we'll be meeting for many, many years to come. So you have an open invitation to our future meetings before we even start the present one. We are equally delighted to co-sponsor this event with the Outer Space Institute, whose partnership is deeply appreciated. The diversity of knowledge and experience represented here, ranging from traditional security to emerging technologies, AI and the outer space, underscores the complexity of the global landscape that we are trying to navigate. To put it differently, the combination of minds gathered here, from those who study what happens on Earth, what on Earth is happening here, to those who look at the outer space, shows just how wide our security interests have become, and indeed how wide they must be. I would like to extend a very special word of thanks to Paul Meyer, who, as many of you know, is truly the tireless force behind this event year after year. Paul is a fellow in international security and adjunct professor at Simon Fraser University. He is a founding fellow of the Outer Space Institute and a director of the Canadian Pugwash Group. In short, he is the one who makes the rest of us look organized. Paul, thank you so much for your dedication, for your amazing energy, for your wisdom, and for everything you do to bring us back here year after year. Thank you, Paul. Now, over the course of today's panels, we'll explore themes ranging from Canada-US defense cooperation, or perhaps lack thereof, to Arctic security, nuclear arms control, cyber and AI challenges, and opportunities for Canadian diplomacies in an increasingly volatile world. The depth and diversity of expertise represented here is truly amazing. For that, I'm really grateful to all of you, and I invite everyone to take full advantage of this amazing expertise by fully engaging. We'll have extensive Q&A sessions for each panel, so please don't be shy. Please ask questions. We look forward to your questions and comments as much as we look forward to the amazing presentations that we have here today. So, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you for lending your time, your wisdom, your energy, and enthusiasm to these vital discussions. I wish you all an engaging conference, and I wish all of us at least a few moments of optimism in what can seem like very dark times. Before I invite my friend Cesar to say a few words on behalf of the Canadian Pugwash Group, I hope you will allow me, on behalf of CIPS, to give voice to the Indigenous affirmation. We pay respect to the Algonquin people who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. We pay respect to all Indigenous people in this region from all nations across Canada who call our national capital home. We acknowledge traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders, past, present, and future. And with that, with my deep thanks to all of you for joining us today, I would like to invite Cesar to say a few words. Thank you all so much for coming.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Alexandra. You're always so gracious and so welcoming, and always make us feel at home. And not surprisingly, we keep coming back, and I expect that we will continue to keep coming back, just because it's such a wonderful, productive collaboration year after year. Thank you to everybody who has made the time to be here today. I think we can expect a few others to trickle in during the day. We really appreciate your time, your expertise, your engagement. I am very happy to welcome you to also to add to Alexandra's words of welcome now on behalf of the Canadian Pugwash Group, which I have the privilege to chair. The Canadian Pugwash Group is a Canadian chapter of the Pugwash Conferences on Science and World Affairs. And if you're not familiar with at least a little bit of the story of Pugwash, both the Canadian Pugwash Group and importantly the Pugwash Conferences on Science and World Affairs, you should be, because the Pugwash Conferences on Science and World Affairs traces its history to Canada, to a small village in Nova Scotia called Pugwash, the Pugwash village. And that is the site of the very first conference of scientists who were inspired by what is known as the Russell-Einstein Manifesto, which expressed the concern, the preoccupation, the worry of scientists of the time about the need for responsibility, for acting responsibly and ethically with scientific rigor to address some of the most troubling issues of our time. And perhaps you have heard one of the most oft-cited or central lines in the Russell-Einstein Manifesto, which is, remember your humanity and forget the rest. And that continues to inform the work that we do at Pugwash in Canada and at Pugwash internationally. And we continue to try to address some of the most pressing security challenges of our time, not least the elimination of nuclear weapons, but also other sources of insecurity and instability. And we try to do it through dialogue, through scientific engagement, and through a very strong ethical framework. We have, by the way, and I know there are students and there will be students in the room, we have membership in Canadian Pugwash Group, and we have associate membership in the Canadian Pugwash Group. And we very intentionally do not put too many barriers to access. I mean, if there is somebody interested in engaging with the Canadian Pugwash Group, please see us. We are very much interested in expanding our network of experts in Canada and abroad. So thank you very much once again on behalf of CPG. Now I have a few reflections about the themes and the topics that we're going to be addressing today at this conference, and we will hear a lot more nuance and detail, excuse me, as we go through the panels. And this peculiar time that we're going through, I think will continue to be analyzed and studied for many years to come, when the dust has settled on some of the things making news today. This period will be analyzed, and it may even have a name, like the Cold War or the post-war period, the mess, or the Trump years, or the unraveling, the reveal, the age of spinelessness. We will see. But this, we will, there will be a lot of very intentional attempts to try to decipher, to disaggregate what are some of the fault lines, to get at what happened here and why. Why were bad things allowed to happen? Why were poor policies enacted? And we have heard a lot these days about the erosion of norms, the steady, palpable, demonstrable, real-time erosion of norms, and I have myself written and spoken about the erosion of norms. But upon reflection, thinking about this very conference, I think that perhaps more than eroded, norms have been tested. And we have fizzled, they have failed, they have been tested. We were under the illusion that they were strong, because up until now, they were traditionally tested against or imposed on the weaker ones, the adversaries, the would-be adversaries, the global south, perhaps. And that's a generalization. But now, When it is ourselves or our allies being looked at through the lens of international humanitarian law, through the lens of humanitarian disarmament, through the lens of the Landmines Treaty, through the lens of nuclear weapons, then the norms don't apply as strongly, it seems. And then enters Donald Trump. And I think that Trump as well has tested these norms and continues to test their strength and their elasticity. But I think he's not just testing the strength and the elasticity of these norms. He's testing the conviction of those who said they cared about these very norms. He's testing how far we're willing to defend them. He's testing the assumptions we thought were settled matters up until now. IHL is sacrosanct, universal. There's a reason for the Landmines Treaty that is not circumstantial, and it doesn't depend on your proximity to Russia or to an enemy state. It's universal because they're indiscriminate. And many of these manifestations of the erosion of the testing or the flaying of the order that we thought was sacrosanct are plain to see. Everybody knows. Like Leonard Cohen said, everybody knows. Everybody knows that blowing up a small boat off the coast of Venezuela is an extrajudicial assassination. You can't justify that. It doesn't matter if they were not carrying drugs. That's an extrajudicial assassination. Everybody knows that you don't send arms to Israel when there is every predictability of their use for war crimes and for violations of international humanitarian law. Everybody knows that there is a real-time democratic deficit and backsliding in the United States right now. Everybody knows that Iran is right, that the NPT allows for everybody the enrichment of uranium. Everybody knows that the US and the Israeli attacks against Iranian nuclear facilities were illegal, even if you don't like the regime. They were still illegal. So we all know what's happening. Yet, Trump's worldview is taking over. Summarized yesterday at this expert roundtable we held as the view of peace through strength. Not our terms, his words. But now the words of Mark Rutte. Now the words of Mark Carney. Peace through strength. So these are the assumptions. And now we are, again, Mark Rutte from NATO, very clearly and unapologetically, embracing verbatim Trump's worldview. Even when Trump has gone against European interests, even when Trump has belittled Europe, even when Trump and J.D. Vance and his people have been adversarial and hostile and disrespectful to Europe, they thank him. And then soon after, our prime minister goes to Latvia to see our troops, and he says, the only way to peace is through strength. And then soon after, here at home, we hear that Canada is ready to move forward on this Golden Dome project brought to us by Mr. Trump, despite serious reservations concerning its cost, its feasibility, its effectiveness, challenged on sound technical and scientific grounds, with very little public debate and scrutiny. And that's where we're going. And also, not long ago, we heard that NATO is moving to embrace a 5% GDP military increase. At last year's conference, right here at CIPS, we were lamenting the lack of a clear rationale for 2%. For 2%. And we wondered and worried about a distant future because we were already hearing chatter of 3% and 4%. And we're like, could we actually get there in the distant future? Like down the line. And sure enough, now we've embraced 5%. And I think this is problematic if it's done out of conviction, and it's also problematic if it's done out of fear. If it's done out of conviction, it's problematic because it simply will not work. And we have to be on this unapologetic in saying and repeating and emphasizing and reiterating, this will not yield the security dividends that have been promised. It never has. It never has. And this assessment is not based on on bad faith about the future. It's based on common sense, on historical record, and on just a very basic analysis of action-reaction, on arms racing dynamics that we know will happen. 5% more military spending. NATO is already nearing $1.5 trillion a year. A year. This isn't a one-off expenditure. It's this year, and next year, and next year, and the year after. And still, they outgone Russia by about a proportion of 10-1, but it's not enough. And the rationale when the rapidity of the increase started after Crimea was to prevent something like this from happening again. That was the primary rationale, to prevent something like this from happening again. And even if not everybody had embraced 2%, the uptick was clear. What good did it do, in 2022? What did it prevent? Nothing. And neither will a 5% increase. It will not only not yield the security benefits that have been promised, it will produce the exact opposite. It will create a predictable arms racing dynamics with China, with Russia, with other powers, and lead to greater instability and lead to greater nuclear risk, among other things. So what we have witnessed, in short, has been a moral, political, and legal abdication to bullying. Some might argue a strategic abdication to bullying, but an abdication nonetheless. To bullying, to Trump's worldview, where everybody's now embracing it. Everybody, and not everybody, but in decision centers, this is what's calling the shots, this view. The view you have just heard from me is increasingly fringe. Perhaps not in this room, I'm not even sure, but it is increasingly fringe, and it is not what is dictating decisions in decision-making centers around the world. It is the other view, the push for militarism. Some would like to see more than 5%, and we may see it precisely because what is happening now is going to create the certain types of reactions that is going to compel us again to revisit the matter in a few years and determine that we need further increases in military spending. So that in itself is problematic. So it doesn't work. And if it's done out of fear, not conviction, then it's just I cannot accept the validity of that rationale. If the Canadian government does this, as Trump himself claimed from the podium of the United Nations not that long ago, at my request, and I quote, at my request, at Trump's request, if we make such a consequential multi-billion-dollar decision that is going to affect security for generations to come, that is going to affect our pocket, that is going to affect the prospects for sustainability, we cannot accept that it was done just because it was at Trump's request. Where's the threat assessment? Where is the parliamentary scrutiny? Where is the analysis that justifies this profoundly consequential decision? I haven't seen it. So fear, however popular it is these days, can also not be accepted as a rationale. And we're seeing a lot of fear. We were used to criticizing countries like Iran or North Korea for projecting fear of the enemy to solidify political power, to advance domestic political objectives, the great Satan outside. We're doing exactly the same. We're doing exactly the same. The fear of Russia is still being milked for increased military expenditures being approved in Congresses and parliaments, across the West. And when we're done with Russia, you rest assured we will start milking the fear of China for even further military increases in military expenditures around the world. Fear of Maduro now. Fear of Petro from Colombia. Apparently, he's we have lots of cocaine factories, and he's the ringleader. And these things take hold and justify policy prescriptions and directions and decisions. So that is the world we're living in. So what's Canada to do? To wrap up, I think in this age, it could take a page from the book of our very dear friend, the Honorable Doug Roach, whom we were honoring yesterday. And he summed it up in 2 words: creative dissent. Creative dissent. Doesn't mean being adversarial to your allies, doesn't mean being hostile, but it does require some agency, some creativity, as the words imply, and the willingness to dissent. But this is essentially an opportunity for Canada. Let's not let it be a missed opportunity. In a time of disorder, to be a beacon for order. In a time of militarism, to be a call for restraint. In a time of conflict, to be a call of a champion of diplomacy. In a time of fraying institutions, to be an advocate of multilateralism. In a time of impunity, to demand accountability. I think those are more aligned with who Canada is. So with that, I welcome you to a fabulous conference today. We will soon move to the first panel. And once again, I look forward to hearing some nuances related to the context we're in through the lens of some specific areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cesar. Really appreciate it. And we would like to invite the first panel to please come up to the podium. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, and welcome everybody, and welcome to our two speakers. We've had a terrific, energetic opening to our conference, and there are a whole range of important topics which we'll try as Cesar said, to elaborate on and add nuance and urgency to. And urgency certainly applies to the first topic that we're addressing today on Canada, U.S. security and defense. And we also have two very well-equipped speakers to help us get at it in some detail. And we've got how much time? We've basically got an hour, so we'll get it. Joel Sokolsky and Walter Dorn, I think they're well known to this audience, and if you don't know about them in detail, the conference material online will fill that in. Both have an affiliation, past or present, with the Royal Military College, and are going to speak to us at a time of some pretty serious transition in the relationship that they're talking about, and that is the Canada-U.S. security relationship. So, Joel, I think you're the first to go, so the floor is yours.
Thank you for the invitation. My apologies for not being there in person. I want to talk about for the conference, the Trump foreign policy and defense policy, and what it means, and then what the impact will be, and has already been. As Walter Russell Mead notes, Trump is probably one of the first Jacksonian presidents of the 20th century and the 21st century. What does that mean as compared to a Jeffersonian or a Wilsonian or a Hamiltonian president? Jeffersonian foreign policy, Jacksonian foreign policy is focused primarily on what is good for the United States. It's focused on American nationalism. It reaches deeply into the heartland of the United States. It actually is not a foreign policy based on an aggressive defense policy. Rather, Jacksonianism shies away from foreign entanglements. But when the United States is compelled through its own assessment to apply force abroad, it does so. It does so quickly, it does so overwhelmingly, and then when the conflict is ended, it's ended. Jacksonians don't stick around to reform countries. They're there to win the battles and then come home. It's based on the maintenance of a large military, although not necessarily its continued use overseas. Jacksonians shy away from alliances and prefers to apply force unilaterally without being burdened by the need to negotiate and compromise with allies. And so this is something different than what we've seen since the Second World War. It's not a Wilsonian foreign policy, which seeks to have the United States work with allies in multilateral institutions. It's not a Jeffersonian foreign policy, which is suspicious of large militaries and rather focuses on the United States domestically. It has elements of these, but primarily Jacksonians would prefer to stay home. When they have to go overseas, they do so quickly, overwhelmingly, and I think we've seen some of this already in the more recent conflicts. President Trump warned Iran that he would attack, but having done so, he's not interested in reforming the Iranian government. Now, for Trump, and here one can say that has Fenimore and Farrell argued, Trump's no hypocrite. Throughout, before becoming president, he complained about the allies, that they weren't spending enough, that the United States was being cheated by its allies. And coming into office in his first administration, he demonstrated that he was prepared to act on this, to compel the allies to spend more on defense. And one has to say that in this instance, he's been successful. It is unlikely that NATO would be looking at a 5% increase with another president. Other presidents were prepared to accept lower allied spending because it was understood that the United States could make up the difference. Trump said he would not accept that, and he hasn't. And it's not just the Russian invasion of Ukraine which prompted this, but it is, as he said, he believed the United States was being taken advantage of. And this is certainly applied to all the allies in this case. He has gotten results in terms of spending. You can see the amount of spending that's going on by Denmark, by Germany, and now even here, defense budget going up. This is likely, I would argue, likely to continue under the next president. As a unilateralist, a Jacksonian, he can afford to dispense with allied advice. He doesn't call conferences to garner advice. He calls conferences to tell allies what he expects of them in terms of spending, in terms of supporting other U.S. policies outside the NATO area. And I think one can see that the effect this has had. What effect will it have here? NORAD is something that has generally been in the strategic backwater of discussions on U.S. defense policy. You can read a dozen books on U.S. defense policy, and the word NORAD doesn't come, and its binational character doesn't come out. But much of what Trump is doing is actually going to have a disproportionate impact on NORAD by its very nature. Why is that? Because as a Jacksonian, he is very much concerned with American domestic defense above all. Every strategic statement in the last few years says the most important thing is protect the homeland, and then builds a force for power projection. For Trump, I believe protecting the homeland really means protecting the homeland, and that means NORAD. He means that everyone when he talks about the need to pull your weight, there's only one other country in NORAD that he's talking about. And that means that in addition to dealing with the European commitments, we are going to have to deal with commitments on NORAD. Somebody's already mentioned the Golden Dome, if it's possible, an air defense and missile defense system for NORAD. Now, here, I think it's important to remember that NORAD is an aerospace defense command, but Canada only contributes to the air defense. It has no role in missile defense. There are no missile warning sites on Canadian soil. The BMD is strictly an American operation, and if under this new system this needs to increase, I think it's Trump's intention to do so unilaterally, and he's talked about the need to create this new Dorn, and it is possible to run a North American air defense system completely separate from a missile defense system. The United States can do that, and there's no need for then Canadian participation in this. So the Trump moves are going to hit Canada particularly hard, more than other allies, because in contrast to other allies in Europe, we are involved in the direct defense of the United States through NORAD. Now, here it's also important to note that Northern Command, the United States Northern Command, is not the same as NORAD. It's a strictly U.S. command. NORAD is folded into it, but it is a strictly U.S. command. So the mechanism is already there for a unilateral move and to hive off some kind of air defense, minimal air defense. You'll still need air defense because the Russians still have bombers, but the United States can run missile defense as it is now, both the surveillance and the interception entirely on its own. So we may see a reconfiguration of NORAD in the coming years, and I think that's quite possible. It may involve a reconfiguration of the American command structure, which would create let's say a North American Western Hemispheric command that would change the nature of how the United States relates to the region. We've also seen, and this goes up into other areas, that in the past, the United States has not linked trade with defense. That American presidents from Eisenhower on have asked for more Canadian defense spending, didn't get it, but have continued, but did not make a very big deal about it. It wasn't linked to trade. Here we have a president who is more than willing, both in the North American context and Europe, to link trade with defense spending. And this is going to change the relationship. And so the one thing we will not see, and it had been discussed, a few years ago, was closer cooperation between the United States, Canada, and Mexico on defense. I think that's off the table. But NORAD itself may rather change. He's a unilateralist. He hinted at it in his first administration, but I think here we're going to see some major moves, particularly if this dome goes ahead. And from Trump's standpoint, the fact that there is a Canadian general in second in command of NORAD may not sit well. And why is that? Where's the contribution? So for all the Canadians who were upset about being ignored in Washington and about not being taken seriously and about NORAD not being given enough credit for NORAD within the NATO context, those days are over too. Something will have to be done. And in this sense, as I said, Canada has a different position than the other allies. Another possible difference or problem is the Arctic. If NATO moves into terms of more importance in the Arctic, and this is picked up by the US administration, this will also cause difficulties. I know this will be covered out elsewhere in the conference, but more interest in the Arctic by the United States does not necessarily mean that that multilateralism will prevail. This is another area where relationships between the two countries may change. So all in all, I think it's the Trump 2 lives up to the promises of Trump 1. We talk about changing our defense and foreign policy. I think the more likelihood is if this continues, it'll be changed for us. Canadians like to be part of the big game. They like to be, whether it's NATO or NORAD, but they may find that this is more difficult with a president who is somewhat dismissive of smaller powers. And then we will find our policies changed for us. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joel. Over to you, Walter.
Great. Really happy to be spending this day with you. Happy UN Day to you all. Delighted to be following two excellent speakers. I think the UN is something to celebrate in human history, given the history of human war fighting over the centuries. It's still an accomplishment that we can be proud of, even as it's now being challenged in ways that we haven't seen since 1945, 80 years ago. It was created with amazing US leadership. Now it's facing despicable US resistance to its progressive agenda. Now, I usually speak about the UN and peacekeeping, so I was a bit surprised that I was invited to speak on this panel along with my distinguished colleague, Joel Sokolsky. He's the real expert on USA-Canada relations. He was also, by the way, my former boss when he was principal of the Royal Military College. Unlike Joel, I haven't published in this area, preferring to work on the Canada-UN relations. But I do work at a military college, the RMC and the Canadian Forces College in Toronto. And we have US officers who are students. And I've seen so many positive US military partnerships between people, between military personnel. Now, I think the problem of President Trump looms over both the UN and Canada. And I'd like to provide my perspective with the academic freedom that's accorded to us at RMC. where we're the only class of civil servants who are allowed to speak freely within our areas of expertise. I'm reminded of an expression that George Ignatieff used. He was my mentor when he was chancellor at the University of Toronto. He said that after he came from the foreign ministry, he was unmuzzled. So I feel a little now that I have to practice this unmuzzling or so many emotions that were kind of pent up while I was at the college. Now I can do in front of my friends and colleagues in the peace movement and in the academic community. So I wonder whether it's better to characterize the current situation as defense confrontation rather than defense cooperation, with the US only half-jokingly saying that Canada is the 51st state, or should be the 51st state. He starts a trade war through tariffs. He's violating bilateral and multilateral treaties. He's destroyed one of the important parts of the Canadian economy, which is the integrated auto market. It was a deal made in 1965, Auto Pact, that instead of Canada producing its own cars, we would integrate into the US market, and that we would create one big market, so we would get part of the US jobs. But now he's ripping those agreements up. He's declared Canadian steel to be a US national security threat. I mean, how is our steel and iron a threat to the United States? But somehow they feel that they need to build it in their own country in order for them to feel secure. And one of the things that really gets my back is he's bullied us with tweets and, or what do you call it, Truth Social posts, that we should rescind the digital services tax. So he did that on a Friday. Then on the Sunday, the Prime Minister rescinded, stopped the implementation of the digital services tax, which would have given us some digital sovereignty in Canada and given some profits to the people who are actually producing the content that we seek on about Canadian news. So it's only been 9 months, and we're already seeing this abhorrent behavior from our neighbor to the United States. And what many things concern me, but I'll mention the border. In fact, I had a discussion with a senior officer, and she said that, Canadian officer, that now on the agenda was the US border, Canada's border, the United States. It was now a military priority. And so we had to be concerned about the US allegation that there's a crisis through the fentanyl coming in from Canada, but it was completely made up. So when you're dealing with a president who can make up what he declares as facts, then you just, you're in a la-la land. You're not on the basis of real understanding and ability to come to common agreement. Now, I mean, I was proud since I was a kid that we lived in the country with the longest undefended border in the world. And Joel will tell you about the Rush-Bagot Treaty, which we at RMC are proud of, because there's a building called the Stone Frigate. And after the War of 1812, where the Canadians successfully repelled American aggression, the British and the Americans decided to demilitarize the Great Lakes. And so the longest or oldest extant arms control treaty in human history is now a treaty between Canada and the United States called the Rush-Bagot Treaty of 1817. It demilitarized the Great Lakes. When the Americans want to send warships into the Great Lakes, they need Canadian permission and vice versa. And at RMC, we have a building, the Stone Frigate, which was used to house the decommissioned British ships that were done as a result of the Rush-Bagot Treaty. So now we're looking at a border where we have to actually consider militarizing, and where the United States is considering militarizing, just as Homeland Defense is being militarized. And think about the soldiers, soldiers that are being sent to cities in the United States that are run by Democrats, by the opposition. This is a form of intimidation using your National Guard. And the audacious, as you mentioned, Cesar, audacious and illegal actions on the high seas in violation of the UN Charter and in violation of the UN Conventional Law of the Seas, and in general, international humanitarian law, and so many different treaties. It's just, I don't know why we're not standing up and declaring that as a major violation of international law. And then we saw the bunker busters used in Iran, something, a level of audacity that we didn't expect. We didn't think that the US would then join Israel. And it was a very last minute, spontaneous decision by the US president to deploy those missiles to deal with the deeply buried Iranian nuclear facilities. And I also want to remind you, if we're looking back at history, and not so much if we look back at President Jackson in the 1820s, but we can look at President Roosevelt in the early 1900s when he threatened to land the Marines in Canada in order to secure more territory and the rights in the Alaska Panhandle. Now, what do I think that Trump could actually do militarily that would challenge Canada? I mean, outright invasion is kind of ridiculous, but poking would be, I think, quite possible. The threat of US ships going through the Northwest Passage, which the US claims is an international strait, and not recognizing the Canadian claim that it's internal waters. We could also see the Beaufort Sea, some militarization there where the US has large claims to sections of the Beaufort Sea, which Canada disputes. And I think we could see more generally the US playing with military cooperation. So using that as a card, like Trump likes to use the card analogy, as he told President Zelensky, you don't have the cards. So the different cards that he has across the spectrum are huge because of the United States' power and actually the credibility that nations have given it over the centuries. And one of those cards could be withdrawal, it could be NORAD. I mean, maybe he doesn't know that in 9/11, the acting head of NORAD was a Canadian general, an Air Force general. I've actually met him. And I asked him what it was like to be there in Colorado Springs on 9/11 and responding to that crisis. So there are times when the Canadian deputy has to take over the head of NORAD as a whole. And he might not be comfortable with that, or he might take action to separate some of the NORAD functions so that not as much information as we saw when Canada refused to join in Iraq. We saw that in NORAD headquarters, some of the functions and information that was shared were no longer shared. That's what my Canadians who were there tell me, that was a kind of way of the US showing its resentment that Canada didn't join in 2003. The biggest threat, though, is not just to Canada. I mean, I'm thinking in the last little bit about nationalism, about this nation, but the biggest threat is the world order as a whole. It's the threat to the United Nations. It's the threat of a small confrontation escalating into a big one out of a war with China or possibly Russia. It is the threat that was the most concern, and it made Albert Einstein and Bertrand Russell come up with the Bertrand-Russell Manifesto in 1955 and the first Pugwash Conference in 1957 in order to deal with the nuclear threat, this big danger that we have. And I'm always reminded, and I constantly tell my students about the 1961 Tsar bomba tested over Novaya Zemlya in the atmosphere. We still have the radioactivity from that bomb in the air today. That bomb was 60 megatons of TNT equivalent. The entire World War II, including the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the firebombing in Dresden, London, and Tokyo, those were 5 megatons. So in one bomb, we have more than 10 times the entire yield of World War II. That's what science has given to humanity. That's what our forefathers or our predecessors. One of my supervisor was George Sokolsky, who did the design for the implosion device in Alamogordo, New Mexico, and for the original bombs. And then when he returned to the chemistry department at Harvard, he worked actively to try and promote nuclear disarmament. realizing what a threat that he had created. The U.S. has said that it's no longer going to be funding UN peacekeeping except selectively by mission. And a lot of that depends on whether the leaders have come up with a peace agreement that Trump can identify with. It's so personality driven. It's ridiculous. It's not a way to run a world. He's gutted U.S. aid. Can you imagine all the people who are suffering and dying because of that more than $60 billion of U.S. aid that was provided to the rest of the world? And I'm going to end with the biggest threat that I see is the Golden Dome. Can you imagine when we look up into the sky, into the night sky, and we see a weapon up there just 100 kilometers above our heads? That's an affront to all of humanity. That's an affront to all human beings. It's certainly an affront to Canada. And it's not only designed to shoot down missiles in outer space, but they're now designing it to be able to shoot down aircraft and UAVs. So using lasers, for which lasers are incredibly powerful devices. The Apollo astronauts put a device, a reflector on the moon, which we could shine a laser and see the distance to the moon and see its reflection back on Earth and measure the distance within centimeters, such as the power of the laser. But however, the Golden Dome is really unfeasible, ineffective. We've seen this debate before. This is what I call Star Wars 3.0. We saw it when it took courage of Ronald Reagan's Star Wars to be refused by Brian Mulroney in 1985. It took courage 20 years later in 2005 when Paul Martin Jr. refused to join the ballistic missile defense that was proposed by George W. Bush. And 20 years after that, seems like it comes in 20 years, that Americans keep trying this new approach to weaponize space and push the technology. We have Mark Carney seeming to say yes to the Golden Dome, which is totally alarming, and I think the peace movement has a real cause for protest there. The danger is that it will poison near Earth orbit just from some of the tests, from something that goes wrong, from creating an arms race in outer space where there's now other countries trying to test their weapons in space, and then you create so much debris that an essential part of our global economy now, it will be a threat and partly destroyed. And of course, the Golden Dome creates instability. And we're back to Cold War scenarios that are truly mad, like the mutually assured destruction. And you could result in a conflict between nations because as one side mistakes perhaps a missile launch, perhaps an aircraft, perhaps a flock of geese, and we see the Golden Dome being activated. And with all the uncertainties of artificial intelligence and the technology involved, it's really going to be a threat to all of humanity. So I have some notes about defense cooperation and that, but I'll leave you with just one fact on that, and that the Canadian defense budget is hugely increasing now. I remember at the end of the Harper government, we were at $18 billion. It had actually gone down under Harper in the last few years for budget deficit reduction. Now we're looking at a budget of $60 billion. We're using the new NATO guidelines. My own college, we're doubling the academic faculty. We're hiring 12 new professors. There's so much money, we actually have to, splurge on this. Meanwhile, GAC, the Global Affairs Canada, is having its budget cut by 15%, and so are other departments in the Canadian government. So it's very alarming to see that we've militarized our fiscal reality in Canada. I'm going to conclude by quoting John F. Kennedy and seeing how true it's today. When he spoke to Canadian Parliament a few blocks from here, he made that very eloquent analysis of the relationship between Canada and the United States. And it was still stands true that geography has made us neighbors. And history has made us friends. Although sometimes I hear it say that the United States is our best friend, whether we like it or not. Economics has made us partners, but that's now being challenged because we're facing a very reluctant economic partnership. And he said necessity has made us allies, referring to the Cold War. Now, is Trump making us adversaries? Well, after hearing Cesar this morning, I can't use the word adversaries. So let's say that that Trump is now making us creative dissenters. Thank you very much.
Many thanks to both of our panelists. We now have about a half hour, and I invite people to go. Is there a microphone? Yeah. Okay. And before going there, I wonder if I might put a question to panelists. Joel, starting with you. I mean, you made several references to NORAD facing change. And you elaborate just a bit more on what you see. I become speculative as to what direction, in which direction it's going to change. But how do you say the possibility of that change unfolding? I mean, there was a separation of NORAD entirely from the aerospace part of the defense.
Yes,
But
yes.
your further comments on that.
In this sense, Northern Command, if it stays around, will retain missile defense and warning. NORAD's headquarters would move out of Colorado Springs and would deal only with air defense. So you would not have this binational command. As you remember now, Paul Martin did, as Walter said, turn down missile defense again. But he also agreed that the information from NORAD, a binational command, would go to NORAD from sensors from NORAD sensors. So it wasn't an entire refutation of missile defense. It was that decision which allowed NORAD to continue in the early 2000s. Had Canada said, no, NORAD's binational, we can't allow its information to go to the American defense systems, the Americans would probably have to reassess it because it's air defense, which from the beginning was where Canada contributed. If it's not going to contribute to missile defense or other things, why have it? Air defense can be taken over by another arrangement, Air Force to Air Force, just as the navies cooperate without a binational command. Okay, and you wouldn't have this integrated staff of NORAD and Northern Command, and you certainly would not have a Canadian deputy commander for NORAD.
And would that be a realistic way to go forward?
I think it's realistic because it's been suggested before.
Yeah.
You know, it's something the Joint Chiefs had brought up in the 1950s when the idea of a binational command came in, because they didn't want too close a relation with Canada. And also remember, as Walter again suggested, the level of intelligence exchange between the two countries is enhanced by NORAD and by the Five Eyes. But that could be reduced as well. So I think you could see something that dealt strictly with air defense and missile warning and missile assessment and missile defense would, as it is now, an entirely American operation.
Thanks, thanks for that. Well,
Thank you.
Walter, creative dissent. Any thoughts on what form that should take when it comes to Canada-U.S. defense relations?
Sure. Thoughts? I think one is diversifying our relations so that we work with others. Right now, the Trump policy is to pick off the countries one by one, or in the case of the EU, that he recognized them, that amazing human achievement of the European Union being integrated enough that he views them as a whole. So we should actually work closer with the Europeans. We should work with like-minded on issue by issue, saying this is where we have to stand up. We can't allow the divide and conquer policy that Trump has, which is part of his strategy. So I think that one way is to find those issues and express solidarity with those who are suffering because of this, because we may become the victims in the future. So when we see problems well, even in Africa with the cutting of aid, we should really step up our aid. And there are opportunities. There are silver linings that come with Trump's approach. There are many USAID, Agency for International Development, programs which were super excellent and that could have been that could still be supported now by Canada and other countries working together, because they're already effective programs, and there's now an opportunity because they did a completely slash and burn approach to foreign aid. So I'd say that's one way, is working with allies. But also, I think at times we have to stand up to a bully. I mean, the digital service tax result was just showing Trump that you can bully and look what can happen. And now we did that because the threat then was that he would end trade talks. Well, this morning's news is that he's terminated trade talks. I mean, we got to show that there are consequences for acting like a bully.
Thank you. Well, there were, I see Sylvie's had her hand up, and so Sylvie, and then Paul, and
good morning. Thank you very much for this excellent presentation, although a bit depressing. I want to thank my military career for allowing me to be in Cheyenne Mountain years ago, being witness to the signature of NORAD, and also for participating in the renewal of the North radar system. So I was in the North, and I saw us building short-range radars and upgrading our long-range radars. So I had the pleasure to be in MIT, in Boston, because we had a problem with the Americans, and also in Virginia to see their assets. And at the time, over 30 years ago, while I was doing this, so I'm aging myself, they thought they owned the North, okay, the Americans, that is. So I was a constant reminder that the land was Canadian. So I'm very proud of NORAD, and I want to also say that I applaud our Prime Minister's strategic positioning and in dealing with Donald, so that he could be off his back. And I would say to you, review what he says, because it's often conditional. So just to raise hope here. Thank you very much for the very convenient label of calling Trump a Jacksonian. This is dating, so 1820. And I want to remove that label, but because you raise that time frame, if you are fond of history, please review how the state took over Hawaii. Very enlightening about how that happened, and then very frightening about our own border. So I would like you to remove that label, and if you could look at the question, how do you deal with a narcissist who says that he could invade Canada anytime. And I would encourage the National Defense Research Center, who I know have been working on trust for a number of years. I've got friends there. If they should also look at how to deal with a psychological profile of narcissist. Thank you.
Well, have a go.
I think that everyone in the audience can have a view on this because it's how to deal with narcissists. But first of all, let me deal with the North warning system. Sylvie, thanks for your contributions there. It's very likely that of the $40 billion that we are going to be spending for NORAD modernization, I think we'll increasingly be making sure that that funding is going to Canadian companies to upgrade the North warning system. And so that's make sure that the economic, because if the U.S. is playing the game of spend the money at home, then we can reciprocate and then we can actually use that as leverage. Well, there might be some U.S. companies that can do it better, but we will have to say we'll consider them if you also consider opening up to truly free trade. Just while I'm on the $40 billion, by the way, we're buying $40 billion of subs. The Norwegian and German ministers were in Canada to lobby Canada, and we can expect a trip to South Korea pretty soon. You'll hear about it in the news. And the importance is that that's another $40 billion. I mean, it's just, when you think about the billions that are being spent, it's ridiculous. How do you deal with a narcissist? You cannot reinforce that narcissism. You have to be respectful. You have to be professional. But at the same time, kowtowing to Donald Trump is only going to increase that ego power. And I'll give you an example. Early on, when Trump was elected, Justin Trudeau was told that Trump has a way of shaking hands. He grabs your hands and pulls you right towards him and then shows you that he's in control. So Trump, meeting with Trudeau, it used to be that the first meetings would be with the Canadian Prime Minister, but that wasn't the case with Trump. I think he went to, it was George W. Bush who broke that tradition with going to Mexico first. But Justin Trudeau was advised, and he knew that when that pull comes, he could pull back. So it was like, you're not going to pull me towards you. I'm standing my ground. Well, how about that for an expression? Stand your ground.
Joel, I'm going to go to the next questioners. You can take the opportunity to deal with narcissism in response to some of the other questions in just a bit. But Paul.
Yeah. Hi, Paul Meyer. Thanks, Joel and Walter, for that. For those thoughts on a really tricky subject for us all. Joel, my question, I mean, in response to Ernie's question, I think you got into this, but it was just that I always thought that the NORAD had always an early warning and threat assessment role that wasn't limited to the atmospheric threat, so that has always been an aspect that goes beyond simple monitoring and air defense. And the feed into Northern Command, allowed that distinction in terms of ballistic missile defense being exclusively an American project. In my mind, there's no, to my knowledge, there's no requirement for Canadian territory then or now for that. And of course, any decision about retaliatory nuclear strike rested in the, dare I say, safe hands of the president. Walter, and though this could be commented on either, but your point about the artificial crisis and how that affects this militarization of the border really struck me. I mean, objectively, it was ridiculous to cite fentanyl flows from Canada, which amounted to something like 0.001% of those entering into the U.S. as a national security threat requiring a response. I mean, it clearly was motivated just by the American legislative situation that required that kind of pretexts being cited in order to move to the tariffs that were opposed. And the question here really is how best to respond to a state that cites objectively ridiculous excuses for detrimental action towards us. What is the optimal way of dealing with that? Thanks.
I'll go to Joel first, and then to you. And I'm just ask you to be reasonably succinct, because we don't have that much time. We have a couple of more questioners coming. Joel.
There's a functional aspect to NORAD and of the binational relationship. And then there's one, it stands for something. It stands for cooperation that the United States doesn't necessarily need, but would prefer. In the old days, it would prefer it. It's one less item off the U.S. security agenda. It doesn't have to worry about arrangements with Canada being difficult. How do you deal with the narcissist? I think it's difficult. I don't think there's anything. I mean, if the American people, or at least the Democrats, the people who don't want kings, can't deal with it, how are we supposed to deal with it? That's my question is, how are we supposed to deal with it? The other thing is, and this is a difference today, large sections of the American legislative branch are appearing to go along with this. You used to be able to look to Congress when a president went off the rails. You can't do that anymore. And that's a problem that we and other allies have.
Walter.
Sure, Paul. On NATO, it also has a role in maritime domain awareness, so that there's tracking ships. That's an important function. And for most of its history, space tracking, because the radars could see into outer space. They were necessary for detecting the threats in the air, and then threats from space. So moving through space. So we had the object. The objects were being monitored by NORAD. Now, some of that's being transferred to Space Force, this new force that Trump created, and his Department of War, by the way. That talk about a symbolism, moving from a Department of Defense to Department of War. On the false excuses like fentanyl crisis and that, I can't help feel that the falsehoods, they spread faster, but truth catches up. It just takes a lot longer. But you have to work so hard to catch up. So it means that, getting the figures for fentanyl coming from Canada would be getting that figure exactly, and I should know it so that I can constantly use that. And it should get on social media, including the Republican, or say conservative right-wing media that have all of their the false excuses getting into that debate. Now, I don't like to go on those sites, so don't ask me to do it. But I think that's a way is fighting falsehood with truth.
Thank you. We've got two. Well, I think we're going to take both of those. We'll take all three. I'll go to that side, and then we'll gather the questions from the three. And I ask you once again to be reasonably succinct and get to the question, and we'll get three questions out and then to the panel.
Thank you. My name is Hamid Georgiani, and I'm with CIC. And I want to congratulate first Paul and University of Ottawa for organizing this event. Very insightful. And Walter made very interesting comments, and I would like to build on that and actually ask you a question. Walter is right. I think we have to start thinking about ourselves in a very systematic way to get to the points that you alluded to: international order, UN, and all those different institutions that have been very successful, and Canada has played a very significant role in that. Just the footnote before I ask you the question is, I spent some of my time in Holland, and the respect that people have for Canada is incredible. And they were constantly reminding me of the heroism and high moral values of Canadian soldiers during the Second World War. So Canada has a great role to play. And the question is, Walter, how can we come out of the cocoon and start advancing some of the values that Canada has at the international level? And this has been also reiterated by Mr. Joe Clark and Lloyd Axworthy at the event that we had on 27th of January. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm going to go to Robin now, and brief. We just have a
I'll be
few
quick.
minutes, and then Firdaus.
Robin Collins with Pugwash Group. The subject of the Golden Dome came up a bit, and maybe it'll come up later. I just wanted to see if we could parse a few of the important aspects of it. Pugwash has a statement or two on it, and we're making a somewhat nuanced critique of the Golden Dome and its risks. But can we separate strategic ballistic missile defense from other aspects of the dome that could be compatible with NORAD as it already exists?
Thanks, Robin. Firdaus.
Thanks. Happy UN Day. I have a very quick comment.
Quick.
Set aside the fentanyl argument. I mean, it's distracting. The question I have is it in Canada's interest to secure the border? Every police group in the country will tell you that most of the guns being used in Canada are coming up from the US. What worries me the most is that a single person putting a terrorism in their car, putting a bomb in their car, crossing the border into the US. That will have a greater impact on Canada-US relations if that actually happens. And it's not that far away. A guy was stopped about 10 miles from the Quebec-US border fairly recently. We keep adding groups to our terrorism list. In February, we added about 6 or 8 groups, I don't recall. We just added an Indian terrorism group to our list very recently, about 2 weeks ago. So my real worry is that the only guy who ever was convicted of 9/11 was a guy who put bomb material in his car and crossed the border from Canada and presented himself to the US authorities. Fortunately, the US authorities found him and convicted him. But if there's a successful crossing ever of a terrorism attack, you won't have to worry about the free trade agreement or the Canada auto agreement or anything like that. That'll have a profound impact on Canada-US relations.
Thank you, Firdaus. Joel, and then Walter, and then we'll make this your final comments before we go to a coffee break.
One of the problems we have is it's not clear that we could make common cause with NATO allies. They have much more at stake in terms of the security of their territory. We've already seen the rush to increase defense expenditure and on their part, because as much as you would want to see a common European approach, they are anxious that they need the United States to balance off. You know, we've tried the third option before, and it doesn't work. When push comes to shove, the Europeans will do what they need to do, and it doesn't necessarily mean greater cooperation with Canada, and that's part of our dilemma. And this applies both to trade and to defense. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter, or thank you, Joel. Now over to Walter.
Yeah, so I know that Trudeau put forward the third option, but it doesn't mean that we'll fail in the future. There's a really strong incentive now to create new treating mechanisms and new partnerships. CETA is now in force, so the Canada-European Union trade agreement. We have something to build on in these trade agreements, and there we can rely on our trade partners to live up to the terms. I think to advance human values, we need to work with like-minded nations, those who truly love law and order at the international level, who like to seek a progressive building of new treaties and implementation mechanisms and indeed enforcement mechanisms. Especially when you're dealing with the bully, you need to be able to work together to have enforcement mechanisms to support the rules. And a middle power like Canada really depends on a rules-based international order. And the center of that rules-based international order is the United Nations. So I recall Lloyd Axworthy, who created the Human Security Agenda and a community of nations that were putting forward human security and what achievements we could do when we put our mind to it. We got the International Criminal Court, we got the Landmine Convention, we got the responsibility to protect, and going back to Pearson with the first peacekeeping force, and there's so much we could do with peacekeeping missions. So I think that there's Canadian precedence and there's a Canadian hope, and again, I'll say happy UN Day to y'all.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Thank you to both of our panelists, Joel Sokolsky. Good of you to join us remotely. And Walter, thanks a whole lot.